Well, it just shows you, thanks Chairman, and thanks Joe, and thanks McGill for inviting me, it just shows you that some things do not change. When Joe kindly invited me to participate in this evening's proceedings in Glenties, he added a little prayer to his invitation. He said, "I hope you're not going to use the occasion, Michael, just to bang on about the Seanad." And I heard him seeding the debate earlier by asking leading questions to our Danish friend. And I'm going to answer Joe's prayer in two ways. One, I am not going to use this occasion just to bang on about the Seanad. And secondly, I am going to use this occasion to argue that the ill-considered and harmful proposal to mutilate our constitution by abolishing the Seanad is part of a wider and deeper crisis in Ireland's democratic process. Echoing what Emily O'Reilly said here earlier this weekend as she departs the Irish stage, I strongly believe that Ireland, as a sovereign, independent, democratic republic, has reached a point of crisis not merely in relation to its economics, but also in relation to the workings of our democratic institutions and in the democratic process itself. At the heart of this dysfunctionality is the relationship between two great constitutional pillars of the Irish state, the legislature and the executive. And in particular, I believe that the truly abject and pitiful role now played by Parliament in the affairs of our country has reached a point where I believe that Parliament deserves a new deal as a vital necessity. The time has come, I believe, for a decisive shift in the relationship between the executive, the government of the Irish Republic, and its Parliament, the Oireachtas. As Emily O'Reilly pointed out, the Constitution provides that the government should be answerable to Dáil Éireann. That duty of accountability requires of the members of Dáil Éireann that they collectively vindicate their own right and duty to obtain accountability in the manner envisaged by the separation of powers in a democratic republic. The greatest problem, as I see it, in the governance of the Irish state for some time, and during periods when I have been in opposition, in isolation and in government, during all of those periods, it lies in the wholly supine and cowering traditional posture of the Dáil as an institution. The problem does not lie in Seanad Éireann and will not be addressed in any manner by the abolition of Seanad Éireann on the 4th of October. It's hard to exaggerate the dominance of our executive over Dáil Éireann. The proof of such dominance is everywhere. No Dáil committee, and I say this to you now and I ask anybody to contradict me, no Dáil committee has in my experience or memory ever seriously challenged or even seriously embarrassed a government minister in respect of any aspect of the discharge of the executive power of the Irish state. If you rack your brains to think of an instance when an Irish minister went in before a committee, got a grilling and ran out in horror saying that went badly, it has never happened. And that is unique in Ireland. And we heard earlier in Denmark, very simple things such as the fact that a Danish minister going to a council of ministers meeting in Brussels has to check in first with the committee and tell them what he's going to be doing and the stances he's going to be taking. I tried that when I was minister, and I found that the committee just wanted to discuss local matters such as drugs issues in Dublin. They weren't interested in European affairs. Now, in my paper, and there's one for everybody in the audience at the back, by the way, I point out that the present government chief whip has admitted that the present government's performance on political reform is deplorable. And I set out a number of examples there, which I don't want to waste too much time on. But I'll give you one. This government got elected and undertook to the people that it would only use the guillotine on the rarest of occasions. It's used the guillotine on 57 to 60% of legislation going through the door. And as Owen Murphy points out in his very useful proposal for Dáil reform, pamphlet which has been circulated here, they don't turn up for accountability debates in the Dáil. They send in ministers of state from other departments who read out a supplied script and who know nothing about the subject on which they're speaking. I just want to say one thing here. I lost my seat in 2007, and one of the TDs who gained seats in my constituency was Lucinda Creighton. And Unlike other EU member states where primacy of conscience of members of parliament is enshrined in the constitution, and Finland and Germany are examples of that, and unlike Westminster, we recently witnessed a highly competent Minister of State on European Affairs being hounded out of office, out of her political party, out of her rooms, and threatened with being hounded out of politics altogether by deselection, all because she chose to take a principled stand in respect of her views on the issue of abortion, a stand which she was wholly consistent with the manifesto in which she sought and obtained election at the last general election. Now, I don't personally agree with Lucinda Creighton many of her views on abortion, but I wonder what exactly it is about the Irish system of democracy that we must exact such a draconian penalty from someone whose only fault it appears that she took her own party's general election manifesto seriously and opted to put her personal interests in second place to a heartfelt moral principle. She wasn't the only person who lost the whip in recent days. Both government parties lost people, but she is the most high-profile person, and her fate shows exactly how dominant the whip is in the Irish political system. Now, the New Deal that I'm talking about for Dáil Éireann, and I looked at some of the proposals that Owen Murphy circulated today, and they seem to me to be good. But I think we need an entirely new set of standing orders for Dáil Éireann under Article 15 of the Constitution, emphasising the independence of the Dáil from executive control. I think the Ceann Comhairle should not be somebody appointed by behind doors a deal between the government parties on the day the Dáil convenes. The Ceann Comhairle should be the champion of Dáil Éireann's rights. The Ceann Comhairle should be the person who stands up for the Dáil against the executive and against infringement of Dáil Éireann's rights. The Ceann Comhairle should be elected by secret ballot of the members of Dáil Éireann, and just as in England, the Speaker of the Irish Parliament should be somebody who has status, judgment, independence, and the right to call on who he or she wishes to participate in debates, not simply to be told by party whips that this is the list of speakers and the troublemakers will be kept off them. And there are many other things which I set out in my paper here, and time doesn't allow me to go through them. But one of the things that is most important is that in selecting committees and selecting chairmen of committees and in selecting who will serve on committees, the members of Dáil Éireann should stand up for their own rights in this matter and not be told by a whip that because you've misbehaved, you're off this committee or that committee. Where does it say in the Constitution that the government can exercise such powers? It doesn't say it at all, and it shows just how completely rendered to the status of a political eunuch Dáil Éireann has become, that it submits voluntarily to this tyranny from the executive. I'm not naive about the whip. I do believe that in certain respects there has to be a discipline among parties. But I do know that the Progressive Democrats managed perfectly well with a clause which was availed of by both Liz O'Donnell and Bobby Malloy. A clause which allowed them on a point of conscience to vote against the party position or to abstain on it in Dáil Éireann, without any terrible consequence. It wouldn't happen in Westminster. Why does it have to have such terrible consequences here? I think that it's about time that Dáil Éireann actually shook off the decades of subservience and prostration in front of government and squared up to government jointly and collectively and insisted on an entirely new relationship where the government and government ministers go in before committees who have faith and confidence in their own capacity to ask hard and searching questions, and who demand real accountability from ministers, not simply have a situation where the government members of the committee posture as being supporters of the minister and the opposition try to score points off them. If you look at Westminster, which is a parliament which has some faults indeed, but if you look at the way it works, an English minister can't go in now and depend on the Tory and Liberal Democrat backbenchers to give them a free pass. Alas, in Ireland, it is totally different, and the reason is that our government totally dominates Dáil Éireann. Now, to give you an example about this, myself and Micheál Martin were in government together between 2002 and 2007 when the property bubble was developing. And Like many, I suppose, and I presume like Michal, both of us would wish that we had actually seen the light and had objected or whatever, pulled the emergency cord and said this must stop or whatever. But we weren't alone. The opposition outbid us in the 2007 election, and indeed the central bank and the ESRI and all the institutions of state told us that everything was more or less hunky-dory at the time. But I do ask the question, if Morgan Kelly, the UCD economist, had been brought in before a committee of Dáil Éireann, a finance committee of Dáil Éireann, and allowed expound his views as to what was going wrong, and if the minister had been required to come in and answer his points, and the central bank governor had been required to come in and explain how 110% mortgages were not contributing to a property bubble, and if the Department of Finance's officials had been brought in and grilled on that subject, then perhaps the Parliament would have actually challenged what was a sleepwalk into an economic crisis. Now, was it right that the central bank should be entirely immune from Dáil scrutiny at the time, as it was? When I was elected in 1987, at the time of the passage that Sean O'Rourke read out, I remember putting down parliamentary questions questioning the efficiency and the output and the work rate of the central bank and whether it was doing its job properly. And I was told that because it was an independent institution, nobody was accountable to Dáil Éireann, and no minister would respond to any questions put down about its effectiveness. Now, I do make the point that if the members of Dáil Éireann behave like sheep, and if we are effectively casting at election time for one man and his dog woolly extras, we're bound to have a situation where the executive gets away with pushing the Dáil around. And I also want to make a point very briefly, and that is that voters have a part in all of this. Now that we're told that we're going to keep multi-seat PR, the question is, do single-issue or ward-heeling TDs, when elected to Dáil Éireann, really represent somebody who will achieve accountability from a government on national issues? And the flip side of multi-seat PR localism is if you vote pothole, you'll probably get economic black hole. If you want to put in men and women who are really about the business of demanding accountability from the government effectively, people must vote along those lines and not vote for the person who looks after the potholes, the pensions, and the like. A point that I also believe is that the Seanad has a huge potential role, if it's reformed, to bring in talent into the Parliament, which is not going to arise simply by multi-seat PR, TD only membership of Parliament. If you have to fight a bloody battle with your constituency colleagues, even from your own party and from other parties, to get elected on local issues and turn up to this, that and the other locally, there are some people, perhaps, who should be in our Parliament who are elected on a different principle. People like Mary Robinson, Gareth Fitzgerald, W.B. Yeats, other people, I don't care who you think are worthy people to put in the Seanad, but people who have served this country well. And there is no reason under the Constitution why it shouldn't be you and me who elect senators rather than incoming TDs, outgoing senators and county councillors. The present system of election of the Seanad is simply not provided for in the Constitution and not mandated for the Constitution, and has largely succeeded in producing a mirror image of the Dáil in the Seanad, with a few notable and heroic exceptions. Now, I am passionate about the Seanad as an issue, and I've set out in this paper for your consideration what Gareth Fitzgerald wrote about it in 2003. I've also set out what T.K. Whittaker and others recently wrote about the folly of abolishing the Seanad for your consideration. I want to make one quote, if I may, Mr. Chairman, and that's Mary Robinson speaking in the Seanad about the role of the Seanad. She said, "I believe it is vitally important for the future. It's a safeguard to our democratic institutions, to human rights and to civil liberties in Ireland, and it is a very important one. And the Taoiseach might remember that Michael Collins stoutly defended bicameralism in 1922, and that his predecessor John A. Costello did the same in 1937. Now, the one last thing I want was to produce my stage prop here. On the radio this morning, I pointed out to Richard Bruton that the actual cost to every citizen per head per annum of maintaining the Seanad was less than the price of a 2-litre container of milk. And that was based on going to my local Aldi and Lidl in Ranelagh in Dublin, where it's about 180, 190. Unfortunately, I discovered that the cost of living is higher here in Glenties. It's €2.09. But I just want you to consider this. The price of this, even on Dublin prices, and forget Glenties prices, is the price of having a second chamber in our Parliament that every person on this island pays every year. To anyone who says we cannot afford the Seanad, we cannot afford a chamber which will improve our legislation, which will act as a check and balance to the power of the government and the power of the Dáil, which will exercise a veto over the removal of judges and the President, which will prevent the Dáil by itself alone abandoning our tax veto in European affairs. To anybody who says that the price of that is too much to pay annually to have a chamber in which Mary Robinson stood up for women's rights, a chamber in which W.B. Yeats stood up for the rights of Protestants in this country in 1925, a chamber in which David Norris stood up for gay and lesbian people's rights in our society when no similar movement was available in Dáil Éireann. To anybody who says that we cannot afford to have vital safeguards in our democracy, I simply ask them to look at that and say, is that the price that you are unwilling to pay for the opportunity to reform Seanad Éireann, to bring in new voices into our democracy, to give to the Irish people what the Seanad was always supposed to be, and that is a chamber which would act as a counter force to the unbridled excesses of a majority in the Dáil. If we can't afford that in our democracy, if we say that it was wrong that T.K. Whittaker was in the Seanad, if we say that it was wrong that Mary Robinson was in the Seanad, if we say that all of this was just a waste of money and a waste of time that we can't afford anymore, we have fallen very far. And the truth, as I strongly put to you, is that the problem in the relationship between Parliament and the Executive lies not in the Seanad, where there are independent voices, but in another chamber where all vestiges of independence are cruelly treated and cruelly put down in the manner that happened to Lucinda Creighton. Thank you very much.